Cyrus the Great was the king of Persia, and they said it was somewhere between 538 and 520 BC. And then Zerubbabel laid the foundation for the second temple of Jerusalem. We know that the first temple was constructed by Solomon, but during this period, and Jerusalem is in Judah. We already knew that Israel was taken into captivity by the Assyrians earlier. And then eventually, Judah, the southern kingdom, fell to the Babylonians. Uh, Zerubbabel literally means seed of Babylon, or sown in Babylon, conceived in Babel. And it's essentially a consciousness of confusion. If we go back and remember, the Tower of Babel was that tower that they were trying to erect and construct to reach up to the heavens. And then it was destroyed and scattered. And that was a metaphor for the languages of how people were given different tongues, different languages, and they couldn't understand each other. And when you can't understand what another is saying, that leads to confusion. That's ultimately what we're always wanting, is to understand and to be understood, because that allows people to, I guess, to empathize, sympathize, empathize, or have compassion with what we're going through. And when we can't understand another, then those things aren't in place. So metaphysically, Zerubbabel represents a very strong and influential thought activity belonging to the spiritual phase of man. It comes to light in the consciousness of the unfolding of the individual in the midst of stress and sorrow, of the sense of confusion and bondage, which is Babylon, into which he has drifted because of not understanding the nature of spirit. So the Zerubbabel obviously was, a lot of times we go into another culture, they say, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. So he had, I guess his parents had adopted many of the ways of the Babylonians, and in fact named him seed of Babylon. And we know, again, we emphasize this each and every time, whether or not historically there ever was a person of Zerubbabel, it points to us that we can get into situations where we begin to take on the attitudes, the thoughts, and behaviors of those around us. And if those attitudes, thoughts, and behaviors are not rooted in what we know to be truth and right thinking, then we can fall into confusion, and we're in bondage to that state of confusion. We're in bondage to Babylon. We're being held hostage by those thoughts, those confusing thoughts, the chaotic thoughts. We saw a little bit of Babel just yesterday, when those who were elected to lead us went into a state of confusion because of the chaos that happens when one person began to use their tongue to create chaos and animosity by some irresponsible comments, personal comments about another person. And those things led to disintegrated. We saw it literally in our House of Representatives, how those things can happen. We can disintegrate into a chaos. One faction not trying to understand the other faction. It continues on to the day. We see red and blue, left wing, right wing, whatever. If there is no basis for understanding or attempts at understanding, it leads to chaos and confusion, ultimately even violence, whether that violence is verbal violence, and sometimes, as we've seen, it could even go down into, descend into physical violence, as we saw an example of that on the January 6th, when people are not willing to understand. And that's what Zerubbabel represents. Yes, Gail?
Well, when you said the violence and the red and blue, then you're talking about the Crips and the
Bloods, for sure. Even they have come together sometimes when they understood that there was a bigger cause. There was the self-destruction movement, or stop the violence. There were two of them. Self-destruction was the East Coast. That was KRS-One. But stop the violence, and that's when the gangs came together with the West Coast rappers, and they understood that they were coming together for a bigger cause, that the violence imposed upon them was much more significant than the violence and their reactions to the violence that they were imposing upon each other. Because most of the time you were either a Crip or a Blood based off an accident of where your mom or pop actually was able to get housing or afford an apartment or whatever else. So if you happened to be born on Crenshaw, then you were this, or if you were on Hoover, you were that. So it was all just it was one of those things to divide and conquer, keep those folks warring against themselves so that they don't realize the bigger war that's being going on around them.
And they also came together as far as getting the drugs out of the neighborhood.
Getting the drugs out of the neighborhood when there was the whole thing that was going on with, Rodney King and all those other movements where violence erupted. They showed a capacity to collaborate and cooperate. And that's something that these tribes of Israel were never able to successfully do. That is, cooperate. When you look at those tribes, when you look at the people that Israel fought against, that Judah fought against, most of those were descendants of their very own brothers, because those 12 tribes faction, and then they began warring against each other. You can't, a house divided against itself will fall. And that's ultimately what happened. Another one of those prophets that we read about was Jeshua, which should sound very familiar, Joshua or even Yeshua. Jeshua was the high priest who went along with Zerubbabel back into Judah to try to reestablish, to restore it to its former place, for the restoration, the resettlement, and to commence rebuilding the Temple of Jerusalem. Those two were responsible for getting the foundation at least laid, to get that part of it started. Jeshua literally means Jehovah is deliverance. Jehovah is help. Jehovah is salvation, or Jah is free. It is essentially the same name as Joshua, Yeshua, or Jesus, the Greek. So it all means the same thing. And we begin to see those patterns that emerge and repeat themselves, that there's some deliverer that comes. The only difference is that between Joshua and Jesus is the extent of the consciousness of that realization of identity with the I am. Jesus was able to say the God and the Father and I are one. He recognized that evolution of consciousness, that there was no separation, whereas some of these earlier ones, the precursors to Jesus, they talked about God as being separate as opposed to being God in me, through me, as Jesus was able to articulate and to express. Metaphysically, Jeshua means salvation or redemption through Jehovah. It is the I am. That Jehovah is really you as well. Jesus and Jehovah represents that spiritualized, idealized man, or mind. You can replace man with mind, that Christ consciousness that is within us. And that is the state that we all are working towards, evolving towards, revealing the Christ consciousness that is within us already. And that's why Jesus did not come to be worshiped, but he came as an example and not the exception. There's a book called Illusions by the same person that wrote Jonathan Livingston Seagull, Richard Bach. And in it, it is like the journal or the diary of the reluctant Messiah. There's one story that is illustrated, that is written in the beginning of the book, and it's looked at like it's almost handwritten, the typeface that they use, and it gives the story of these little creatures that were hanging on, clinging to the bottom of a stream, and that was their existence, clinging to the bottom of the stream. And they were all living in fear because they were afraid to release and let go and get caught up in the current, because if they did, they suspected that they would be dashed against the rocks and the stones there, and they would die, until one little creature got bored of this existence of living in fear and released. And sure enough, the current caught him and it did dash him about, but eventually he got into the flow of the current and was able to move smoothly along, and all those other little creatures who were trapped on the bottom of the stream still, who trapped themselves, who were hanging and clinging, looked up above and saw this other one that was moving smoothly in the flow and the current of life. And they said, this one must be a Messiah, because look at him, he's doing the impossible. But really, all he had was the courage to release and to let go and allow the flow of life, that current of spirit, to guide and direct. And so many of us are in that same situation of clinging on, attached to what's comfortable, what we know, what we're complacent with. And we see others who are moving about in life smoothly and moving in the flow. And we think there is something special about them. We attribute that specialness to them that we don't attribute to ourselves, that we inherently have that same power and capacity for possibility, for moving in the flow of life, if we have the courage to release and let go and let God. Next, we move on to Haggai, which means festive, a feast, a festival, joyous, rejoicing. And he is thought to have been one of the original Jews exiled to Babylon. So when he began his prophetic mission, he had to be an elderly person, pretty senior in years, pretty old. His message was basically that the disobedience of God's laws by the Jews was the source of their hardships. Claim responsibility for what it is that you're going through is the first step of getting out of it. If you continue to point the fingers at others of saying, they did it, they're responsible, you caused this, rather than looking at what you did or did not do, then you'll continue to remain in that situation. Metaphysically, he represents a realization of good as taking place, the seeming evil, that there is good that we overlook too many times with our focus on the what we have labeled the evil. And this spiritual insight of man allows us to be joyous, to be upbeat, to be full and free and delivered even before we are physically delivered, because we know that they can enslave the body, they can enslave, restrict our rights, they can do all of those things, but they can't put shackles on your mind. They can't put shackles on that. And when you can tap into that ultimate feeling of an expression of freedom, that vibration of there, then you are continued to be in bondage and shackle. Um, he foresees or foretells the working of good when we allow ourselves to be obedient to God's laws. The laws are not personal. They are gravity is not personal. None of those things are personal. What Johnny Coleman used to say, it works if you work it. Even when you don't know you're working it, doesn't matter. Those laws will still work. And when we can get our minds and our spirits vibrating on the right frequency, athletes say it's getting in the zone. You've heard that phrase before. They say they're in the zone. What it is that they can't seem to miss. You've seen Steph Curry in the zone. You've seen the young lady out of Iowa in the zone when they're just throwing up from seemingly anywhere on the floor and it's going in. But what they've been able to do is recognize the feeling, as Reverend Ike would always talk about, getting full of the feeling of what does that feel like to be in that zone, and that allows you to get back into it. Joe Dispenza talks a lot in his books about mind waves and frequencies, going from the beta waves into the alpha stage, where you have that ultimate freedom of a capacity, and you're vibrating in a way that you just can't seem to go wrong. And when you can recognize what that feels like to be in that mind wave stage, that's the first step of being able to return, to restore yourself, to get back into it. And this whole story of the restoration is, how do we get back in right alignment with God? And that's a story that happens each and every day, and sometimes each and every moment, because we're always recognizing that we can be sensitive enough to recognize that if we're feeling a way about things. If we're feeling bad, feeling jealous, feeling envious, feeling inadequate, feeling scared, feeling unworthy, feeling less than, feeling any of those things is symptomatic of something else. It's like our pain. Pain is a symptom of something. We've gotten into the society where we're treating pain as a disease, and that's why there's the opiate crisis, because we're trying to treat a symptom as if it is the disease when we hadn't got to the root, the radix of what's going on to deal with what's causing the problem. Pain is actually a good thing because it's letting you know that something is wrong that needs to be looked at, addressed, and taken care of. And if it wasn't for the pain, that root cause could go unchecked and it could lead to even more dire consequences. There are actually people who cannot feel pain, and that's a severe condition because they're constantly burning or cutting themselves. Pain lets you know that something's wrong. You can retract, pull back away from it, and say, I need to do something different. So the opioid crisis, which was created by folks who wanted to get paid off of your pain, that's what it created. Hey, God, metaphysically is the realization of good during seeming evil. Uh, we mentioned a person, Cyrus the Great. Cyrus means the sun or the rays of the sun. He was the first to put together uh, the Persian Empire, the first Persian Empire, or the Achaemenid Empire. Uh, what is today modern day Iran? The interesting thing is that as you read these stories, you keep going back to contemporary parallels because so much is still happening in the world. Iran was a world power, and at the time, it was the largest empire at that point in history. It spanned from the Balkans. Cyrus the Great, he's listed as a pharaoh of Egypt because he conquered Egypt, and his kingdom spread all the way over to like India. So it went into West Asia and down to the Indus Valley, which is the beginning of India to the southeast. Cyrus the Great represents the will as ruling and sense consciousness. Will, we know that will is the executive faculty. So Cyrus represents the ultimate will or the ruling idea and consciousness that by the Lord he is the one. However, in his heathenness as a king, he was still a wise ruler because he was able to piece together this huge empire, and he was the one who allowed the Jews to return out of captivity, out of their exile, out of bondage. So something in him was stirred up by God that even this person was inspired. The rays of the sun, he was inspired to do what was right, contrary to the usual custom, contrary to what was the expectation. And that by this we find that the Lord inspires men and women, men meaning minds, who are open to the truth wherever that truth may be found. And that's why we label ourselves truth students, because we are seekers of the truth. We're not content just to have it told to us, what was handed down to us over time, tradition, dogma, doctrine, any of those things. If they don't ring true, sometimes they don't resonate with us in feeling, and we can sense that just doesn't feel right. And then we use that intuition to sense consciousness is what allows us to find what brings us peace. That's what we're ultimately going for. Returning to Jerusalem, the place of peace, restoring the walls that protects us to rebuild the temple of our consciousness, the temple that is within, so that we can restore our connection and our relationship with God. Cyrus the Great was the beginning of that, to allowing them to be able to do that. This is how this empire spread. I said it was such a massive thing. When you consider it went from Egypt and Libya, we see Cyrene over there that at that tip of that, If you remember the story of Jesus on his way, the Via Dolorosa, the path to the cross, his crucifixion, when it got too heavy to bear, there was a brother called Simon of Cyrene who came and helped to carry his cross. And we see that is from the tip of northern Africa. As I've said before, there was no separation. This Palestinian place was considered a part of Northeast Africa. And that's why these stories are of our Afro-Asiatic brothers. Asia is over here. They call it the Middle East here. I don't know exactly what that means, but it was all a part of Africa at some point, and these people would go back and forth in between. We see how close Jerusalem is to Egypt. We see it now as the people are leaving Gaza, which is a little strip right in there. Many of those refugees are going into Egypt. So that same pathway existed back then, and there was less uh, uh, hindrances, less borders, less uh, uh, boundaries for getting back and forth. We know that we've constructed a lot of modern gateways and passages and all those sorts of things, but there was free movement back and forth. So Darius was the son of Cyrus. He was the next ruler who came. Darius was one who conserves or one who constrained. Uh, Actually, Darius was not the son. I'm sorry. Let me get that straight. Let me get the stories right. Darius was the next king, but he was actually not the son of Cyrus. He was the next one to rule Persia after Cyrus. But during that time, the next in line was Cyrus's son, Cambyses, and he ruled for a while, but he was not an effective ruler. That the territory that he was governing was so large that it took a great administrator to be able to do it, and that was not his capacity. Eventually, factions arose, and there was a coup attempt that was happening. There was a group of usurpers who wanted to overthrow Cambyses. There are lots of different stories about how that went about. It was told that there was even a physical imposter, somebody who looked like him, was placed on the throne for a period. So there was a lot of intrigue that was going on at that time. And it's told that either Cambyses, I've heard two stories, and I put it here. Some said he may have committed suicide, but I've heard another story that in one of the battles, he was received a wound in his thigh, and it got gangrenous, and he actually ended up dying from gangrene. But either way, from that group of those who overthrew him, they elected Darius to be placed in as the next ruler. And so Darius may embellish some of his story as well. You know, that's how we do when we're not the legitimate. We try to create a story that allows us to be legitimized. But Darius came in as the next ruler. Again, he also represents will. Those rulers represent will, or the central ruling ego of sense consciousness. However, it recognizes the value of and gives a high place in government or spiritual judgment, as we'll see later on, was symbolized by Daniel, so that he becomes actually a conserver of true substance and conscious in our organism. When we are open to the truth, as was Cyrus, despite the circumstances, what happened to put us in these situations, when we are open to truth, there still can be some good that comes out of it. So that all things work together for good when we have that faith that allows us to do that, to operate from that, good can continue to flow with us. Any thoughts, observations, or comments before we go on?
One comment, just to go back to what you were saying about
Yes, sir.
not being personal. Dr. Reverend Dolores always says this, and she did a whole sermon on it. It's not personal, it's principle. When you follow principle, everything falls in order. I just wanted to make that comment. That was it.
Oh, no, great. It's not personal, it's principle. Let us say it works if you work it.
Yes.
Personal ain't got, that's why we may be able to say, dang, how can these people who obviously don't care or seem to care anything about God, seem to prosper and do so well, when the righteous, the ones who are in church every Sunday, who would seem to want to do everything right, and we see them struggling to pay their bills, struggling to do this, struggling to live that what Jesus said, abundant life. So what's going on with that? Honestly, there are people who are working spiritual laws and are ignorant to those laws, but they're falling in line with them. You don't have to know any of the call letters to WCLK, V103, or any of that, but if you tune it to that, even by accident, you're going to get what is being broadcast and transmitted there. And you're going to get in the groove of what it is that they're playing, whether or not you know how it's done. I don't know what the station is doing, how's it transmitting, how much wattage they have, who the announcer is. None of that you have to know, but you've tuned to the right frequency and you are aligned with what it is, that the frequency, the vibration, good vibration. Yes. And that's what it's all about. Good vibes only. And when you can create those good vibes, as we talked to before about feeling good, you don't even have to be out of your situation yet. But if you can tune yourself in some way to manipulate your thoughts to those feeling good, affirming affirmations, saying those words, let the weak say, I am strong. If you can consistently do enough to make you feel good, take the words of Earth, Wind, and Fire. When you feel down and out, sing a song. Those things can transform the frequency at which you're vibrating, and that change of frequency will also get you in line to things that are transmitting that you are aligned with, and that will elevate your situation. Don't wait to get, to do, or to have, to be. But they say be, do, and have. That's when you change that order of priorities, and then you align yourself physically, spiritually, metaphysically, energetically, vibrationally, frequency to what is being transmitted. And that's when we have to use that will, the central ruling ego of our sense consciousness, to not allow the sense consciousness to dictate how we feel, but allow the ruling conscious to dictate to how we feel. Don't let your feelings dictate how you think, in other words. Let your thinking dictate how you feel. Next, we move on to Zechariah, and that looks very familiar because Zechariah and Zacharias are really variations of the same name. Zechariah means whom Jehovah has remembered. Jehovah has remembered me, whom Jah calls to mind. Jah no. He started his prophetic mission the same year as Haggai, but he continued years for several years longer. And metaphysically, it's the entrance of spiritual thought into man's consciousness and lifting up of spiritual understanding. That's what Zechariah, so each iteration of that Zacharias, it all literally means pretty much the same thing, that they've remembered God. They've gotten their mind back on track. What Romans talk about 12:1 and 2, be ye not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, getting it reset. When you get a computer or a phone, there are default settings that come with it. And sometimes we start adding things on and it gets a little messed up. We've added some malware or everything onto it. The things are not working in sync. And we can go back, we can default to our factory settings. We can reset and start over and get things right. And that's ultimately what repentance means. It really just means turning around, doing a 180. Don't do a 360 because you're going to end up right back in the same spot, but do a 180, turn around and do something different. Then we have that third Isaiah, the Trito Isaiah. And I need to change this because that's not right on there. But Trito Isaiah was that third Isaiah that we talked about. There were three of them. This one was more akin to the message of the first one. And I'll come back to him because there's more I want to deal with on this one, but I have some other stuff written on Obadiah. There was a lot of prophets that we were going through in this one, and I apologize for the length and the breadth of the reading that was required. Who actually was able to get through all of it? Well, I'm not going to fault or blame you because there is a lot. But this is a 10-week course, and in order to get through all of it, we have to move pretty quickly. It sounds like a long time, 10 weeks, but we're already at the halfway point of it. And, you know, so we have to move over to our next book, Be Ye Transformed. And so we're going to have to do a lot on that. And that's why I didn't try to throw out homework assignments and all that sort of stuff, other than the reading, because when we immerse ourselves in the reading, if we can get through that, that's enough, and we can take on what we need. So Obadiah was the next one. Obadiah, servant of Jehovah, servant of Jah, worship of Jehovah, worshiper of Jehovah. It is the shortest book in the Old Testament. It's just one chapter. Obadiah was over the household of King Ahab. Obadiah feared the Lord, and so he hid 500 prophets in caves and fed them when Jezebel, in her pursuit to cut off the prophets of Jehovah. So that was the sin that did Jezebel in, to quote Lauryn Hill. But Jezebel was trying to get them. So Obadiah wanted to protect them and actually put them into a cave and fed them. Obadiah represents the higher thoughts in man that serve and worship God through the I am, the Jehovah, the indwelling Christ. They are faithful and true. They are thoughts that are obedient to spiritual ideas that hear and heed the voice of spirit. So even when it's working against us, that people don't want this to happen, if we know that we are doing the right thing, then we are listening to that indwelling voice of spirit and being guided by spirit. He had spiritual ideals that he wanted to live up to, and he criticized the territory of Edom. Again, as I said before, all of these are really, it's not a story of how far apart these people are, but how close they were in terms of actual blood relationships and kinships, and yet they still couldn't get along. Like sometimes those are the ones who we have the most issues and troubles with, the ones who are closest to us. Obadiah's message was basically a criticism of Edom, which was a territory that was adjacent to Judah, but Edom was descended from Esau. And that takes us back to the story of Jacob and Esau. Jacob was the younger twin who came out right after Esau. Esau was the oldest, but he came out grasping his heel and holding on to him. And they had that sort of sibling rivalry relationship throughout their life. And we talked about how Jacob was able to trick his father, his blind father, into giving him the blessing that was due to his older brother Esau. The blind father could only feel, use the senses. And when we can align with the blind father, you know, they say justice is blind and all those, it really relates to it. It's really being about the feeling. He was able to get the father to connect with him because he said, ask the question, are you my son Esau? And he said, I am. You are who you say you are, if you can evoke that feeling and get that vibration. So Esau, from that time on, was mad at his brother Jacob, and they became enemies. And even the descendants of Esau, which became the ones known as the Edomites, they were against the people of Judah and Israel because they were upset that the brother Israel had cheated their ancestor, their forefather, out of his inheritance. And so there was always that enmity between those two, and it went on and on. Next, we go to Malachi. Malachi was the last of those messengers. His name means one sent of Jehovah, messenger of Jehovah. angel of Jehovah, angel of the Lord, a prophet of Jah, a minister, a servant. He was the last of the minor prophets. And nothing is really known about Malachi, but he got famous by the mega churches and the super preachers. Creflo Dollar and all those guys loved to quote Malachi because he was the one who said, "Will a man rob God?" And he said, "No, but how does he do it? In the tithes and offerings." And that became such a popular scripture for getting folks to contribute. So that's what Malachi is best known for. He was probably also from that time of Nehemiah, but again, that's conjecture, but it's based off of what's said about him, how he introduces himself in chapter 1:1. He is the voice of conscience in man, calling his attention to his shortcomings and encourages him to do right. Last time we met, we talked about another prophet representing conscience. Does anyone remember who that prophet was? That was Asa. Asa also represented conscience, the conscience that pricks us when we've done something wrong. You remember, Reverend, where we were talking about, I knew I should have, or something told me. That's who we were talking about. That was Asa. So Malachi is like a return of the voice of Asa, that consciousness of telling the nation that you guys have done something that was out of order. You've been robbing God of his just due. And we're not literally talking about, the tithes and offerings, the physical and the monetary and those types of things. But we also rob God of giving proper attention, sacrificing some of our time, some of our talents, some of our abilities, and in those ways helping to restore the kingdom of God to its right place, to restore our Jerusalem, our places of peace to their right order. There was Ezra, who literally means help. Ezra was a priest and a scribe beforehand, and he was one of those who brought a large number of Jewish exiles back to Palestine after their Babylonian captivity. He did much to establish, I guess, the law among the people and to return to their ways, their customs, and so forth, and to help to rebuild the temple and the wall of Jerusalem. And he worked along with Nehemiah to get that done. It's to note that he was a scribe meant that he wrote things down. He documented. He received it and he put it on tablets. And so that is always so important. We saw that from some of the other prophets who became major prophets. It was because they were the ones who wrote down their sermons and their prophecies. And so the importance of writing things down is always reemphasized as well. The book of Ezra is a lesson in building the house that is made with hands. The house that we're building is not a structure, a physical structure. We're not talking about the temple, even though the temple was what they rebuilt. Again, we're talking about the temple that is ourselves. Even Jesus noted that know ye not that you are the temple of God. He talked about you can destroy the temple and in 3 days he would rebuild it. And that's why they laughed and scoffed at him and said that, how in the world are you going to do something that took us years and decades to get together and to rebuild? And again, it was emphasizing that I'm not talking about a physical structure. I'm talking about the temple that each and every one of you are. And that's what we're doing in this course as we build that Bible in us. We're building that temple that is us. It's the building of a consciousness that we're on the road to, and that's what Ezra symbolizes. The faculty of mind that receives and transcribes upon the tablets of memory, the wave of mind that touches the consciousness. The Jews had a tradition of they would write little scriptures down and they would carry them, they would affix them to their garments and wear them around with them. And that's on the outer. What you really need is to get these scriptures internalized, to consume them. It's what we do when we're doing taking the communion. There are some traditions. I know the Catholic Church believes that it literally turns into the body and the blood of Jesus, but we know that it is a symbology that we internalizing the body and the blood of Jesus, the body of what he stood for, and the blood, the spirit that he exemplified. And when we can consume that, when we internalize and digest it, and it becomes a part of us, just as the food we eat, when we consume it, it literally becomes a part of us. And so that's why we have to be careful with what we consume, metaphorically and also literally, because it is what we consume are the building blocks for us, for building new cells, new structures, new brain cells. Well, we can't build new brain cells, neurogenesis. We haven't got that yet, but we can do all the other things. We can protect those things, and we can rebuild all of our other cells, because we are completely new people after several years. I'm not sure how long the time period is, but all of our cells die and are eventually replaced, and we are completely new creations, literally, over periods of time. And so that's what we are rebuilding, that physical temple, but we're also in the process of rebuilding our spiritual temples. Don't tell all your business. Sometimes you got to keep some things to yourself. Nehemiah, Jehovah consoles, Jehovah confronts, repentance of Jehovah, compassion of Jah. Nehemiah was a former cupbearer to King Artaxerxes of Persia. He was the grandson, I believe, of Cyrus. But Nehemiah was the cupbearer. It's like the water boy. That's a high quality H2O. That's what he was. Basically, would say he was a slave or a servant. But because of humility and the quality of his character showing forth, he was elevated to a position of responsibility with the king. And what was laid upon Nehemiah's heart was to go to Jerusalem and to rebuild the walls. His prayer lifted him up into courage and confidence in God, and that he was able to ask the king what it is that he desired. And because the king knew and trusted him, I guess it's like we've had we as enslaved people here in this country, often those enslaved were the very people that were serving the enslavers during times when they were having meetings, and they were talking in confidence about things that were going on. This was happening during the Civil War. There were many women, especially, who were utilized as spies for the purpose of sharing information with the Union, because they were not seen as people. Conversations were held around them, often conversations about war efforts and what was going on, and what they were plotting and planning. And because these people were just disregarded as furniture, they were able to carry some of these communications back and help the Union in its cause, the liberation of these enslaved folks. But King Artaxerxes saw something in Nehemiah, that same type of quality of confidentiality and being able to share concerns with them, that he entrusted him. And eventually, Nehemiah, like so many on our side of the Atlantic over here, were able to do, was able to use that confidence they inspired for the good of their people. And he went on to Jerusalem to help rebuild the walls there. And so what Nehemiah says is in Nehemiah 2:11 is, so I came into Jerusalem, and I was there 3 days, and arose at night with the men that were with him. He had a very select cadre of folks, but he didn't tell anyone. He says, I didn't tell anyone what God had put in my heart. And sometimes you have to do that, be a little bit close to the vest with what it is that God has put in your heart that is uniquely yours. Because people have a way of There are those who are the naysayers and the negative Nancys who are going to come out and say, well, you can't do it. It can't be done. There's no possibility. You don't have the resources. We don't have what it takes. And they're going to go on and on over all the reasons why you can't do what it is that God has told you what you should do. And they're going to prevent you from going about your mission. But sometimes even more insidious or even more of an impact is not those who are negative against you doing what you want to do, but those who are actually genuinely concerned about you and out of their good intentions are preventing you from doing what it is that you want to do. They are so afraid based on their experience that out of a love for you, they're trying to prevent you from going on. You should get a job at the post office. You got benefits. You should do this. Are you going to be able to survive on your own? Nobody's ever been able to do this kind of thing that you're trying to do. Do you think that, and they give you all those reasons, and not because they're intentionally trying to hinder your progress. In fact, it's out of the opposite concern. They want to protect you, but that can sometimes stop you from doing what it is that you know that you need to do as well. So Nehemiah is one who has been carried away from spiritual peace, Jerusalem. He was a captive, and now he wants to get out of that confusion of Babylon and desirous of restoring the holy city, desirous of restoring Jerusalem, the place of peace. And we're in our Nehemiah consciousness and our Nehemiah mindset when we know that we are out of order and we're trying to do everything that we can to restore and rebuild and bring back into order. Yes, Lisa.
I like the way you described and gave reference to all of that, because that's how I feel now that I've said yes to being a coach. It's because I too was that person. Get a good government job, you get these benefits, you can retire, yada yada yada. But I wasn't fulfilled doing those things, although I was good at it. And I was successful at it. And then I went into the hospitality industry and I was good at it. And I was successful at it. But it wasn't fulfilling at all. And what fulfills me most is when I can help people not take necessarily the traditional, the safe, the bubble movements, but to move from their true space and their true heart in doing things that they know they feel more compelled to do, and take a risk on themselves and trust the God within to do that. And when I operate from that space, I get all kinds of success stories back and thank yous, and it's fulfilling, and I'm happy every day I go into work, and now I'm able to even do more in that same genre of doing. So yeah, I love Nehemiah. I've been attracted to Nehemiah for a long time.
For some reason, I've always liked the name Nehemiah. There was even a track star. He was a hurdler by the name of Ronaldo Nehemiah, Skeets Nehemiah. He went on to be a wide receiver in the NFL. But that name Nehemiah always connected and resonated with me as well. Yes, Gail.
Well, just like you, Lisa, my family, they, basically put you in that little box of get that government job. It's, all the benefits and whatnot. Because I always said, I don't want nobody telling me what to do, what time to come to work, and giving me these weird hours and stuff and no weekends off. And I ended up retiring from the post office 42 years. So.
And now the post office has changed so much, Gail.
Oh, yeah. My uncle who retired from the post office, he used to always, whenever we were in the same room or something, he would say, so how's that temporary job? Because I would always say, this is just temporary because, I was between jobs. And he said, well, how's that temporary job going? I said, yeah, it's all right. It's all right. But then when I retired after 42 years, he said, oh, so you like that temporary job? I said, well, I enjoyed what I was doing.
Right.
I said, but it wasn't what I wanted to do.
Right. And that's the thing is, I mean, a lot of times we often use the post office as a sort of example of, getting a safe job. And absolutely nothing wrong with the career in the post office, because I know folks who have done that. And as you say, they've enjoyed it because there was something. There was a sense of more of you were contributing something in a good way, because the nation was so dependent upon the delivery of mail for commerce, for sharing of personal correspondence, for gifts, for connection. And the post office was one of the major inventions of the United States and the postal system, having those rural delivery, having those boxes out there, that connected this country for so long that we shouldn't take light of it or slight it. And there are many who were able to create middle class existences from their work at the post office. What we sometimes get on now is about it was such a good job, like a Pullman porter in the day when people wanted you to get on with that, or to be a teacher, it was a nurse, preacher. It was one of those that was accessible to us, even though there was rigor in getting into the post office. Not everybody got into the post office. You had to take exams. You had to show a competency in sorting and doing all these things and remembering all those postal zip codes and zones and everything else. So no, we can never take anything away from it. But now, because of email and everything else and everything being transmitted so much quicker electronically, we see the how the post office has gone down, and that's something that we complain about. And where I live is that the mail is always misdirected. It's misdelivered because they don't have that same level of commitment. They're not even wearing uniforms most of the time these days. You see people in shorts and everything else putting the mail in, where you used to see that postal truck coming and it represented something. The carrier got out. He was in a crisp uniform and everything else, and it had a certain weight and character and dignity about it as well. Now they seem like they don't even care about the jobs, and there's a huge turnover that happens in there, and we don't even get the same person. Used to be you would know your your carrier. They developed a relationship. You knew what time to expect the delivery of the mail. They knew who you were. They sorted it out, and even if they messed up on your name or your address, they know who you were, and they were able to get it to you. So we're missing a lot of that, and we see, as I talked about in Congress, where there was a certain presentation, a gravitas, a dignity, that you took pride in what you were doing. And it was not just about getting likes or getting press or getting popularity or any of these things at all costs. It was about you took your job seriously. And like Nehemiah, who had a job that one would say, well, that was a menial job. He took it seriously. They say that how you do anything is how you do everything. That because of how he gave himself to that, his character was recognized and he was elevated. It's like being promoted within in those organizations. When they see you a great sorter, you become a great carrier, you become a great administrator, you become a union representative, you begin to rise up in the ranks and distinguish yourselves. And that's what we seem to be missing these days. Everybody's just about causing controversy and chaos. We are trapped as exiles in Babylon. We're still in Babylon. And that's why the Rasta is always singing about Babylon, getting out of Babylon, because we're in that consciousness of materialism. And until we can get out that consciousness of materialism and return from our exile back into spiritualism and rebuild those walls and temples to restore our relationship and our connection with the Christ consciousness within. So don't tell all your business. Sometimes silence is the best strategy. You don't have to say everything that's on your mind. James talks about the tongue being the thing that we can't tame, because that little member that can start a conflagration, can set off a forest fire, just like a match or a cigarette that's been discarded in the dry forest. That little thing can cause chaos and confusion. We saw how one of our representatives said something unnecessary, commenting on somebody's appearance, and that led into a whole descent into chaos and confusion. It happens. Sometimes you just need to keep what it is that you intend to do or what you're thinking quiet, because we know that our spoken word is powerful, but sometimes there's also even power in our unspoken word when we have the discretion, the discernment, the judgment to know that I don't want to add fuel to a fire. Let me just back off, release, let go, and be on my way. Wish them well. Brush the dirt off your shoulders, from your feet, and keep it moving. Keep it trucking. Now we go to Ruth. Ruth means a female friend, a sympathetic companion, desirable, delightful, friendship, pleasing, beautiful. Ruth was the daughter-in-law of Naomi. And she was, Ezra had preached a lot against marrying those of other, I guess, tribes. And again, it's such a silly thing, because so many of them were really kin. They were distant kin, that they were connected. They were the same people, but just with the arbitrariness of borders and boundaries and where you were from set up. You know, that colonials, they separated and divided us and have us speaking their languages, and we forget who it is that we are. But these people were the same people with these artificial designations. But Naomi was the mother of two sons, and they had moved from Jerusalem, from Judah to Moab, and her two sons married Moabite women. But the two sons died an early death, and Naomi's husband died. And so Naomi said that, you guys have married my sons, and I don't have any other sons that you can marry, because that was part of the custom. Is if one son died, then the next son could take on the responsibility of that widow, so that they were always protected. There were no social services back at that time, so that's why there was always a thought about the widows and the orphans, because there was no protective net in place to take care of them. And many times the widows and the orphans were marginalized. They went into poverty, and they lived rough existences. So it was set up such that if there was another son, that son could take on the responsibilities of that family. But she said, I have no others, so you are free to return to your people and maybe to remarry again, since you are still young women. And Oprah, she left and took Naomi's counsel, but Ruth committed to staying with her mother-in-law and said, your people will be my people. Where you go, I'll go. I'm riding with you. I'm rocking with you, because I'm here for you. And that's what she did. So she returned to Bethlehem. I'm a ride or die, in other words. And that's what she did. And that's what Ruth represents, that loyalty, the love of the soul in its natural state, or the love of the natural soul of God for the things of the spirit. And that's that Ruth consciousness that arises with us when we develop that devotion and love for what is spiritual and true and right. Then we go on to Jonah. Jonah means a dove, dove-like warmth, affection, lovable, loving, fruitful, productive, fertile. It's passionate. It's all those things. But also, as you get toward the end, you can see that passion can turn into oppression and violence, intoxicating and destructive. P. Diddy called himself, his last iteration was Love. That's what he called himself, Loved. He changed his name to Love. But we see that the passion of Diddy, and we know that is a passionate brother. Whatever he committed to, he went wholehearted. He went hard. Even as a student at Howard in D.C., he accepted an internship with Uptown Andre Harrell, and he would commute to New York back and forth from D.C. to carry out what he was doing, his mission, because he knew what he wanted to do. Eventually, this young protege arose to hire Andre Harrell. His mentor ended up working for him by the end. But that was the passion of Diddy, the passion of Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, the bad boy, all those things but that passion, if not checked, turns intoxicating. The power that we've seen in Hollywood. And it's not just among black men, but we've seen it among white men, Jewish men, all creeds, and that absolute power can corrupt absolutely if it is unchecked. And that is what was happening. That love that Jonah represented, he became disobedient when God asked him to do something, to carry out a mission, to go to the people of Nineveh and tell them that if some of them repented and recanted and turned from their ways, they would be saved. But Jonah had gotten it in his heart, a little bit of self-righteousness. He'd gotten to a place of self-righteousness that he thought he knew better than God, and that these people deserved to die. They deserved whatever they got. And we can see that oftentimes what happens with especially religious folk, that they get so consumed with themselves and what they think is righteousness is the right way, that these other people who think differently deserve to die. They deserve to be bombed. They deserve to be terrorized. They deserve not to live because they don't think as I think. But Jonah went out on a boat, and a storm arose. We know that storm, just as when Jesus was sleeping on a boat, storm arises, and Jonah was asleep just as Jesus was. Uh, Jesus had the capacity and power to calm the situation by speaking to the elements, by controlling the winds and saying, "Peace, be still," and bringing that clarity of thought and what was going on, and to simmer down now, to bring it down, to bring the simmer down now. It's the end, simmer down. He brought it all down. But Jonah recognized at that point that I've done wrong, and the only way to make this thing happen is to toss me overboard. He was tossed overboard. They say that Jonah was in the belly of a whale for 3 days, but the scriptures say that a fish, because we know that whales don't even consume things that big. They eat plankton and smaller things. They filter it out. It comes into them. Whales don't open up and eat like that. So some folks say it was a giant grouper. We all speculate because groupers have big mouths and everything like that. But there's speculation, but it's bigger than always the literalness of it, and always about what it reveals about us. Jonah is that prophetic state of mind on its highest plane. When it's on its highest plane, it's a dove. It's a declarer of ultimate peace and good. But when it functions on an intellectual plane, when it tries to think too much about it, well, I don't think they should be doing that. I don't think I should. That's when it devolves. Yes, Gail.
So you're telling me he didn't get into Jaws or Meg?
He didn't get into Jaws.
He was a smaller fish?
Well, Jaws would have destroyed him. Jaws was that great white shark. He would have eaten him alive. There wouldn't have been nothing left of him. That's why they say it may have been something like a grouper, which has a huge mouth, like those bass that with a huge mouth that's able to swallow and consume something. And then in 3 days, he was belched out. He was regurgitated onto the shore. We know that the acids in the stomach probably would have digested him and all those things. So we don't take it literally, but you're in that stage where was Jesus? In a grave, in a tomb for 3 days. So we know that there's some significance in that it's almost a foreshadow of what the experience of Jesus would be, going into the tomb for 3 days and coming out renewed, restored, different, resurrected, you could say. And that's what happened to Jonah. But when we go from that,
ask this, because I've also heard another story that he was actually in the bottom of a ship and going through a bad dream.
Could be.
And as to being in the belly of a fish or whale or whatever. And that was his whole mindset was, because he was supposedly hiding from God and like you said, did not carry out what he was supposed to do. That he was down there and they were having bad weather and he's in this stream and the ship is being tossed and everything, and that he actually thought he was tossed over and in a fish. Did you? It was all an illusion. Story.
It was all a dream. So that's could have been that as well. That again, I don't necessarily go into the literal of what happened. And Dr. Rocco could talk a lot about it. And a lot of times he'll explain things. Well, that was an idiom. That was a figure of speech. That was something like that. And maybe it was that's what he felt like. That he was in that stage. That he felt like he was entombed. He felt like he was entrapped, and there was no way out, and all those things. And it was row your boat, life is but a dream. And so all of these things are really mental manifestations anyway. And so that's what it could symbolize. The biggest thing is that when we have that love can be dove-like, or we've seen people murder and kill the people that they say they love when it becomes oppressive. And I can't say whether or not Puff loved Cassie or any of those things, but generally, when a murder of a spouse occurs, the first person they look at as a suspect is the other spouse. Because in those moments of passion, in those moments of extreme emotional states, you can act out and do things and it becomes destructive. There was a singer, Selena, back in I guess that was the early 90s. She was a Tejano singer from Mexico. And the person that killed her was the president of her fan club. A lot of those things, you become possessive, you become controlling, oppressive, violent, and you're thinking that I know better than you. You should only be with me. You become jealous, envious. All these things can happen from the people who say they love us. So that love can turn, when it's not rooted in true spiritual affection, and it's only the idea of love. Some say they love you, but they love you when you make me feel a certain way. I love how you make me feel, and when you stop doing that, I don't love you anymore. So that was a conditional love. It came with some predicated conditions, and you violated my conditions, and now it's over. We move on to Joel. Joel meaning whole, entire, complete. Peter quoted Joel. That's probably the main reason we remember Joel, was that quote by Peter on the day of Pentecost as recorded in Acts 2. Now, I didn't even record the whole quote here. This is just an excerpt, but he said, no, this is what was spoken by the prophet Joel. That Noah's response to the people saying, well, y'all are acting crazy. Y'all are acting kind of foolish up in this piece, because they were speaking in tongues. It was as if clothes of fires, and they were speaking these various languages. And he said, no, this is what was spoken by the prophet Joel. In the last days, God says, I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions. Your old men will dream dreams. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those days, and they will prophesy. That is what Joel is remembered for. It's a short book, but that is his most notable thing, because Peter went back to that. Joel speaks the I am and dominion in the individual. Jah is his God, who he desires, who he wills, who fulfills. In this consciousness, all things are possible. We say that I can do all things through God who strengthens me. And that's not to say that you all of a sudden going to step out and be Superman or Wonder Woman, that you can do all things, that you can leap tall buildings in a single bound. What it means is that you can go through any experience, you can endure, you can make it through, because you have the faith in knowing that whatever it is that you're going through in that moment, all things are in fact working together for your good. And it is all good that you're going through, whether you in that moment it doesn't feel good, but there is something that is going to be taken from that, some lesson, some learning, instilling something that ultimately is for building a better you, for your higher and greater good. And when you can take that attitude on, all things are possible. I can go through this. I can do 42 years at the post office. I can go through enslavement. I can deal with this person over here that's giving me a hard time. I can do it. I have the possibility of do it, the capacity to do it, because in this state of consciousness, all things are possible. I can build a better future for those who come in behind me. I can do it. And that's the attitude that spiritual consciousness that Joel represents. And I know time is truly wasting, so we have to keep it moving. The best teacher. Who is the best teacher? What do they say is the best teacher? William?
Your lessons, life.
Experience.
Experience.
That's what they say is the best teacher, experience. And that's what Ecclesiastes represents. The preacher, the leader of the congregation, the speaker. It was supposed to have been written by Solomon in his old age. We had the Proverbs of Solomon, and now we have the Ecclesiastes, where he talks about the vanity of vanities. All life is vanity. Everything and leadership. Landmark leadership training, they say that life is meaningless. Life is meaningless. And when you hear that, man, you think, man, that's a negative statement. That's something sad to put out. By the way, Dr. Barbara also completed landmark education, landmark training. But what it's actually saying is that people are meaning-making machines. They literally use that phrase. We're meaning-making machines. We ascribe meaning to everything. Everything we're going to look around and say, she did that because she didn't like me. All she did was move past you and may not have even noticed you. But all of a sudden you start creating a narrative. She stopped speaking to me. She don't like me. She did this. She don't. And we create this whole circle of stories based off of nothing. We've made meaning out of nothing. Life is meaningless. We ascribe meanings to it. And that's why everything that we create language. And in order for language to be effective, we have to agree upon the meaning of the word or the symbol that it represents. If there is no shared understanding, like at the Tower of Babel, we have chaos and confusion. And so we codify things and create a language with each one of us agreeing that, well, this means that, this means that, this means that. And when we have that shared meaning, it's like having the Rosetta Stone. It allows us to understand. For so long, the Medu Neter was not able to be interpreted. The cuneiform tablets and their writing was not able to be interpreted because we didn't understand the meaning. But when, like with the Rosetta Stone, it had several different languages on it, then we can say, well, we know if it means this in ancient Greek, and it means this in written Egyptian, then the hieroglyphics must mean the same thing. And boom, we had the code through understanding and being able to interpret the hieroglyphics and the cuneiform writings because we had something to compare. So at experience preaches everything more effectively than any words we could hear from any preacher. We learn from experience what to do and what not to do, what worked and what didn't work. I touched that red glowing thing on the electric stove. Remember those electric stoves back in the day when you saw them and looked all pretty and orange, and that's a pretty color. And you touch, you never did that again. And even better is when you saw somebody else do it and you knew not to, you learned from their experience. That's an even better teacher. You don't have to go through it. You can see somebody else go through it, see what happened to them. And then if you're wise, you can take that. They say that the wise can learn from the foolish, but the foolish can't learn from the wise. So The teacher of Solomon was his experience. Solomon had access to everything. He said that he had wealth, he had riches, he had the temple and the palaces, he had 900 wives, he had all of these things. But that sensory overload, just like what happens to the people we see in Hollywood, those who have the sensory overload, access and power to anything, we can grab them by the this or do whatever. That is the attitude that takes over, and that we think that by satisfying the body, that is the ultimate satisfaction. But Solomon says it's all vanity. It all means nothing. It's all like a wisp, like when the sun comes up in the morning and the dew evaporates. It's ephemeral. It goes away quickly. All those things, the luxury, the houses, the cars, all those things that we thought was what it was all about. And we see how quickly those things can be taken away for us. The power that we supposedly have. And then someone else puts us in prison or jail, with like Bill Cosby, access to everything. Weinstein, access to everything. Over and over, that access to everything gets you caught up in sensory overload, and you lose your spiritual grounding. You can start off in the right place. I have no doubt that Puff and all those others probably started off with the greatest of intentions. And I told you that we won't stop. But when you stop obeying spiritual law, when you stop doing what it is that you know you're supposed to be doing, when you deny the power and you try to cover up, when you try to say that I am bigger, I'm above the law, that I can do all, I'm president, I can do anything, and you can't do anything, I am unimpeachable. When you get to that stage, that's when all hell breaks loose. Gotta have a J-O-B if you want to be with me. Just like you were talking about, Gail. We've been told that we got to have that J-O-B. That ain't nothing going on but the rent. So, you got to have that safety and security. And we pronounce it a job, but we're talking about the person called Job. And I'm sorry I got you guys overtime. I'll try to wrap it up as quickly. But Job stands for persecuted, calamitous, afflicted, adversity, adverse desires, a comeback, restored to one's senses, penitent, converted. Job is an interesting story because it has God and Satan waging bets. They're placing bets on Job. They're saying, I bet, this brother is doing good. He's worshiping you and all that. He's all that. He ain't all that. I bet if you throw a little chaos and confusion in his life, he gonna start cursing you. He gonna change. We're gonna see a change. He gonna catch the vapors real quick. Take away his livelihood. Take away his family. Take away his profits. Take away his wife. Take away his health. Job went through all of that, lost everything. And the only advice he can get from his wife and his best friends was curse God and die. That's what you need to do, dude. It's over. It's a wrap for you. I don't see any way out of this thing but for you to curse God and die. Give it up. Wouldn't it be better? Is it really worth it to go through life with this situation, this hardship you've endured? And Job had to go back to the thought of, I've done nothing wrong. I know I can't take that advice. They say, you must have done something. You must have done something. But it wasn't until Job met a young person, Elihu, who represents the Holy Spirit, who was able to counsel Job wisely. Sometimes the old heads don't get it. And it's the young folks who's gotten the dispensation of the Spirit and can tell us what's going on. And he counseled Job wisely, and Job eventually, his former was greater than his latter. He got his health restored. He got a new family. He got new wealth. He got more land. He got more wealth, more prosperity than he had to begin with. And that is the transition of man from personal formal righteousness, thinking of it's what I've done, it's what I do to righteousness, meaning right thinking. It's that true interchange of heart, the right thinking, the consciousness, getting that temple of God together. And that is our very thoughts and intentions and our innermost consciousness that is most important. It wasn't what was happening on the external. We can go through life and things are happening to us and around us, and we see it and we think, man, I must have done something wrong. But no, that experience wasn't necessarily created by anything that you did, but you have to be open to perceiving how God is at work through situations. The ones that we think are negative can be the best thing for us. That door closed. We were fired. We were let go. We were released, terminated. That relationship broke up. We were divorced. There was something that was happened, and then that propelled us. That set us up for the layup. You've seen the alley-oop. You see a guy take a shot. It looks like the shot was missed. He missed on purpose. The other guy comes ahead and then slams dunk it. That was the set up. That's what you're being set up to, slam dunk these situations in life. And we get so caught up and concerned with what's happening around us when we know, and you know that you are on the right track. As what was the thing that says, what you think of me is none of my business. That's all your thoughts, your attitudes, your perceptions. I know that I am in alignment with what I perceive to be the will of God, and I'm acting upon that. So all else, nothing else matters at that point. We go on to the lion's den. Daniel, God is my judge. God is judge, the judgment of God. Daniel was one of those that was taken captive to Babylon. He was named Belteshazzar by the king of Babylon, which translate as Bel's prince. Bel was the deity in Babylon that was most worshipped. So his name meant Bel protects, whom the Lord protects. And we saw that evidenced when Daniel was tossed in the lion's den, not because the king wanted to do it. That was King Darius. We talked about Darius earlier. Darius had developed a relationship and could see the character and integrity of Daniel and recognized that Daniel was offered the best of the fruits of the king, of the kingdom by Nebuchadnezzar. But eventually, when Darius came into sitting on the throne, he recognized that this dude has integrity. And I can relate to him. He has integrity. He can deal with, just because he doesn't do these things, he hasn't taken advantage of the luxuries that I provided. That is all the more reason for me to trust him and rock with him. But there was a setup there by those around the king who said that you've given an edict. You said that anyone who doesn't bow down has to be thrown into the lion's den. And so, being a man of his word, he was sort of forced into doing it. It's sort of like when Jesus was sentenced to death on the cross. Herod did not want to do it. He said, I don't recognize any evil in this person. He hadn't done anything wrong. He even tried to offer up Barabbas for them to take him versus Jesus, but the people overruled. And so Daniel was tossed into the lion's den, and Darius was concerned about his safety and prayed that his God would actually protect him. And that's what happened. Daniel was in the den and came out unscathed. A den of hungry lions, he was protected. And that's what he represents: spiritual judgment, pure judgment, conscious integrity. And that is what will allow you to protect it from everything else that's going wrong. The story of Daniel was written, composed for those to give inspiration to the courage to the Jews who were at war at Syria. They wanted them to have this representative. If he can go into the lion's den, you can go up against this enemy. And Daniel had some compatriots, some buds that he hung out with: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I heard a preacher say a bad Negro. So just underscoring that these were black folk that was participating in this experience. And they represents that understanding of love, mercy, and goodness. The three of them, the hard way, the God way, which a matter of fact, Minister Server, Professor Griff, and a brother from X-Clan are actually doing an event tonight called 3 the God Way, where they show that hip hop, a higher infinite power healing our people. They're putting that together. It's an event, literally. But these three represented love, mercy, and goodness. And that's what protected them when things got hot.
Coming through on your feedback, a lot of background noise. So, I don't know who that is.
Put it on mute.
I think Meredith needs to mute.
Okay. All right. So she may be in a louder place, but I'm glad she's on. But that's what they represented, that fiery furnace, that triumvirate, the Trinity of love, mercy, and goodness, and that can overcome. So they, along with Daniel, they represent that spiritual judgment. Queen Esther, we've known, I added the queen on there because I know black folks have named their kids, their women, you look back, they've been named Queen Esther because we developed that as affinity for her. She's a star, the planet Venus, the planet of love, happiness, good fortune. Esther had all of her relatives, the Jews, the spiritual thoughts, join her in a fast. And what she asked of the king was eventually granted because she came from a place of love. It's the dissolving power of spiritual love. And this is an antidote for dictatorial will. Love can overcome all hardships. We know that love is the most healing and harmonizing force in the universe. And when we can pour out love, pure, unadulterated love, that agape love on others without any thought or expectation of anything in return, that we know that we can make situations healed, harmonized, and restored. And that's what we were talking about today, is the restoration. How those who were exiled, and you know that there was always these periods where they did right. They came to under God and things were good. When they got too good, they did wrong. Then they had to go through this period of chastisement. They got it together again. The prophet came. They did right again, came back under, and there was that cyclical thing that happened back and forth. A lot of it was like in 40-year periods in these time intervals. Again, underscoring that there was something significant and esoteric and not just the literal, but speaking to what's happening within and within the consciousness, and all about returning to Jerusalem, our places of peace, our gardens of Eden, all those places where we can find shelter and comfort from the storms that rage around us, and find that peace that's offered, not in the belly of a whale, but out and doing God's will. They say obedience is better than sacrifice. And that is our lesson for today.